Yes. Okay, should I go ahead and get started, Pamela? Okay, we can wait. Yep. Michelle, I saw you just shared an article that just showed up in Chicago this morning. Was it on WGN?
I don't know if it was on WGN TV, but it was definitely on the website. So I had no idea it was going to be there. So that's really awesome. 2 years and counting.
Yep.
At least one TV station is paying attention.
Has anyone else had an interview for today? Nope.
By the way, Bob, that article mentions Carbondale.
I saw that. Yeah, they talked about 200,000 people coming to Southern Illinois last time. I'm glad they didn't all try to get on campus. Yeah, I did. I had one AccuWeather interview and then a local one this morning. Everybody's still excited from 2017, I think. Oh, and I see Chris said he interviewed for cleveland.com. Okay, I guess it's time. We'll go ahead and get started. So you already heard me talk not too long ago, just before the break. So we have a few additional panelists this time, Angela Speck and Amy Keesee, and I am going to let them give you some introductions here. Angela, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, hopefully you already met me earlier, but just in case you didn't, I am a professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio, but for the 2017 eclipse, I was a professor at the University of Missouri, which was on the path of totality for that eclipse. I'm also co-chair of the AAS Solar Eclipse Task Force. Do you want me to say more, or are we just doing introductions? Can't hear you.
I think that's good for now. We'll just do introductions and then we'll start letting questions come in. Amy, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Amy Keesee. I am currently a professor at the University of New Hampshire, but during 2017, I was a professor at West Virginia University. So West Virginia was just in the path of the partial eclipse, but we did a statewide outreach effort as well as some on-campus activities for that. And now that I'm in New Hampshire, we can do some of both because we are, fingers crossed, path of totality goes across the northern part of the state, although the weather's probably not going to be great as everybody from New Hampshire keeps talking about, but also can plan for the partial eclipse and hoping to do another statewide event this year, or this eclipse.
Yeah, and Amy, I was really interested in what you had done because you did a statewide engagement, right? That included a lot of people outside the path, which most people are outside the path for even this eclipse coming up. Did you try to encourage them to come with inside the path or just do something at their own location? Or
we knew that a lot of the people in the state were from rural areas. There's, traveling. For me, I went to Tennessee, which was a pretty big trip. I knew most people weren't going to be able to do that. And so we wanted to just let everybody experience the eclipse, even though it was a partial eclipse, and make sure that they can enjoy it. So we did a lot of training of educators to plan their own events within their communities, and be prepared for it that way.
And Angela, I know you and I probably had a similar experience as far as working with university campuses in 2017. Did you do education out in the community too? I think you did as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it might be useful to compare where it wasn't the same in terms of, every institution is going to be different. But yeah, I did a lot of outreach to the whole of Missouri, frankly.
Yep. Were your experiences with trying to get administrators on board mostly positive for you?
Right. So this was something that in the, that Dennis was talking about in the plenary earlier. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that I was, more than 3 years out, I was already doing things like, Rotary clubs, those sorts of organizations. And the Kiwanis do a lot of education sponsorship. Our local, Columbia Public School superintendent happened to be there because there were a couple of students getting an award, funding for something they were doing. And so he saw me do a presentation for the Kiwanis, and that completely changed his perspective. And so to some extent, there was an element of, I got in front of him in a place he wasn't expecting he wasn't automatically skeptical because he wasn't expecting to see me. And that made a huge difference. And so Columbia Public Schools was completely open, but it did vary from place to place. And actually a significant number of school districts were only do a 4-day week, and so didn't have school on Mondays. And so they were actually struggling with the idea that they wanted to do stuff that was, educational, but it wasn't a school day. And so, also working with them on how to prepare the kids for getting the most out of it, even though it wasn't a school day. And so, it ran the gamut. It was everything from schools that weren't in session because of 4 days, schools that were in session completely prepared, schools that were in session and decided not to let kids out, schools that decided to cancel because they didn't feel comfortable, everything.
We saw the same here. And I think I just decided at some point to, educate and then let the schools do what they wanted to do rather than try to force something, because it really did seem to work itself out to some extent. We had schools doing their own eclipse festivals, which pulled their parents in and all that. So it was really, really exciting. Amy, did you see similar?
We had a lot of last minute challenges, administrators that canceled events that teachers had planned. I think it was very challenging being right at the beginning of the school year. So there wasn't a chance to communicate with a lot of people very easily. So even the teachers that were interacting with us during the summer probably didn't have as much chance to prepare the parents, prepare the school people. And then, so it just, that we didn't have very good communication lines. So that was a huge challenge. Yeah, and we didn't have lines to them because we communicated directly to the teachers. So there was no way to put out last minute information to counter what they were getting. So a lot of events that teachers had planned got canceled. And so, yeah, it was a real challenge. Luckily, I think, so we had done a big thing where we had sent glasses to a lot of the schools that were planning to do stuff. And those that couldn't have their events then would often donate them to the community so that they could still, at least somebody got to use them and they didn't just go to waste.
I think that issue of being able to reach the, the various audiences that you want to reach is really hard. One of the things I did that, it took a lot of effort, but it was totally worth it, was I would arrange to visit a city where, this was generally on the path of totality, but I would arrange to visit the city and I would talk to, usually they'd only have one each of an elementary, a middle and a high school. So I talk to each one in a row. So I do 3 talks for schools for those 3 levels. Then I would do a public talk in the evening. And that meant that it was kind of concentrated enough, and often the local tourism folks would be on board trying to pull people into the public talk, but that helped with that parent engagement, especially if the kids went home at the end of the day before the public talk and said, hey, we just saw this thing. So
yeah, the kids often communicate it back to their parents in such a way that their parents have no choice but to take them to see the eclipse, right?
Moi, j'étais dans une réunion, malheureusement. Je veux prendre un rendez-vous avec le médecin de famille de mon
is that?
I'll remind participants, if you're not talking, to go ahead and mute your microphones. And Stuart, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Oui, d'accord.
Hello there. I had helped the University of Kansas City, Missouri campus to put together their telescope for viewing the almost total eclipse in the 2017. Last minute, they yanked the plug literally because they didn't want to have the liability of having some students that were not able to see it and others that were, so they didn't want to cancel classes and on and on and on and on. So I also was working with Vivian White of the ASP, and I was a part of the project Mega Movie or Eclipse Mega Movie that was later correlated by Google, and some of that information was there. And so what's the end question? How do we get to the administrators, not just local administrators, but the administrators of larger institutions, and say, look, we could put together a video program, meaning we use the telescopes to actually gather the light safely and then have it broadcasted to classrooms. So no one's really having to be exposed except for, well, those that really want to go outside and look. And then, of course, we give the cautionary about wearing safe glasses or safe viewing instruments, including projection.
So how to engage administrators? I can answer that quickly, and I think Angela's got experience as well. But we have regional offices of education in Illinois, and we engage with them early on, and that they were over, how do I put this? I don't know how many regions there are in Illinois, but they were able to very quickly get that out to all the schools, to the school administrators, as well as put it up the chain of command, I should say, to the State Board of Education.
So I got the impression that what Stuart was talking about was university administrators. Maybe he can clarify. But
maybe. Oh, I might have misunderstood that. Stuart, was it university administrators or just administrators at school in general?
He switched off his camera. Okay.
Okay. So, sorry. Technology is kind of fun for me. It was the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and it was the administrators of the Department of Applied Sciences. It was not really the entire university. Okay, so I don't want to put a black mark against the university itself. It was more that they didn't want to take the liability. And of course, the people that were viewing it could have viewed it from any discipline and any profession within the university.
Right. I mean, I think how you engage with administrators at the university level varies. And in that case, that would have been at the dean level that you were talking about. And, you know, to some extent, again, it's going to depend on, you need to get in there early to really have the buy-in so that there's some understanding of what it's worth. For example, It was probably the first day of classes for UMKC. It certainly was for UM and Columbia. And I actually had discussions with the faculty council for figuring out whether we should cancel classes, whether we should start the semester later, whether we should start it earlier. What was, we had a whole discussion. I didn't go in thinking, oh, we should do this. It was more of a, okay, what is the best thing for engaging the most people and for having the university have the best event? Now, to be fair, I was on the path of totality, so that was a little easier than it would have been at UMKC or UMSL, which was also not quite on the path. And I think if I had been advocating in those places, I would have advocated for starting school late or canceling classes that day so people could travel, because it wasn't very far to go from the campus to get into totality.
Yes.
But, again, this is where I think there isn't a one size fits all. But you do have to start early enough, like the calendar gets set a couple of years ahead. So you have to know how university administration works to know where to step into, okay, how are we going to do this? And that can be really, I think, tricky. I saw that Vivian had posted a question in the chat about, is there a how-to guide? I'm pretty sure there isn't, but we should put that on our to-do list.
And related to that, I did post a link to my paper that includes all the stuff that we talked about, including includes the stuff we did on campus, as well as the stuff we did outreach for the educators.
Yeah, because there really is a lot. I mean, you're doing stuff on campus, but you're also leading the educators, leading the schools, the K-12 schools in your areas. Heather Jones, I saw that you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this is more a question for you, Bob. I'm wondering, you said you got the Girl Scouts involved in your solar eclipse event. I'm wondering, did they reach out to you or did you reach out to them? Like, how was that connection made?
There was a little bit of both going on, but the group that came to us actually reached out to me. We worked with some local groups actually through, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember now, Pamela, it might have actually been through the STEM Center at SIU Edwardsville when you were with them, where we got linked up with them. And then I think somebody at the national level heard about it and got back in touch with us.
So there's a question in the chat talking about
Yeah.
training grads and undergrads to go into schools. It looks like some people have had experience with that. So one of the things that we did, we had our STEM coordinator for 4-H, who works in the extension office for West Virginia University as one of the partners that helped us with our organization. And she trained the STEM ambassadors that the 4-H program uses, which are students that work through 4-H. So they did a lot of work and they were available to go into schools and do lots of stuff talking about the eclipse. And they planned they have a summer STEM project for all the 4-H camps. So they did the summer project around the eclipse. So a lot of the 4-H camps were super involved based on the fact that, we had extension people involved in our planning as well.
Yeah, we had something similar. So MU is the base for extension in Missouri. And so there were a lot of 4-H camps that were doing things around the eclipse. And also we had similar things with Girl Scouts. In fact, this intersects the two last comments. So we had one of those national Girl Scout camps that was based just north of Columbia. And I actually arranged for them. So I didn't want to be doing their event because I was going to be in demand in Columbia, but I trained an undergrad. And so they had an undergrad woman physics major as their lead science person for the Girl Scouts and that was one of these national competition winner groups that they held their camp. So I think there are lots of ways we can train people up to do this. It's really a matter of time more than anything else.
And also with the students, the thing that we did on West Virginia's campus, so we were again in the path of partial eclipse viewing. And so a lot of us actually wanted to travel to the path of totality the day of, so we weren't going to be there to help out with the on-campus event. So we had students from the astronomy class or some of the other physics classes that were willing to go out on campus in the area where the viewing was planned, and they had some solar telescopes and whatnot and glasses that they were able to go and share. So we used students for that quite a bit. Ones that were involved got extra credit in their class or that kind of thing. And that freed those of us that wanted to travel to totality up for that day.
I'll go ahead and mention again. So for this session, we are looking for questions and discussion mostly. If you were looking for a formal talk to go the whole time, we're not going to do it. We're just discussing things here. So just raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. The chat questions were going by so fast a minute ago or a few minutes ago, I kind of lost track.
So there's a question from Noella, which I'd like to address, which is, would having solar observing events before and after the eclipse help people feel more comfortable? And I would say the answer to that is absolutely. It's something that I would actually do programs at schools where I'd go into the classroom and do a whole actually demo with the celestial buddies if they were elementary school kids. If you haven't come across the celestial buddies, they are soft toys of the solar system bodies. They're fantastic. So, Earth, Moon, and Sun, and do that. But then I'd take them outside and I'd have them looking through the glasses. And it was, this is even with elementary school kids, but it helps them to feel comfortable with it. And it also helps the teachers to see it's completely manageable. We did events at things like farmers markets where we would take a solar telescope, but we'd also take just the eclipse viewers out and say, hey, look at this. If you remember, it was probably about 2 years ahead of the eclipse, but there was a huge sunspot. It was enormous. You didn't need a telescope at all. And so I would just like wander around going, hey, look at this. And, show off glasses at people. But, I think that you can definitely do those sorts of events. And like I said, I'm currently looking at, where are the farmers markets that we can go visit on a Saturday morning with our solar telescope and, get people started on it.
There's a question about curriculum. So not necessarily adding to the curriculum, but when we worked with educators, we know that the science standards, a lot of the relevant stuff is in the middle school grades. So as we were prioritizing who we sent classes to, we sent the most classes to the middle school grades, just to go with the fact that they already have that as a part of their science standards in that curriculum.
Yeah, and I think the issue with curriculum is, I'm now in Texas, which has its own standards, doesn't actually do, it's Texas, what can I say? But there's actually more astronomy in the curriculum. And so it opens the door to doing some really interesting stuff. So I have a spectroscopy demo, which not only intersects with my own research, but intersects with what's in their curriculum at 8th grade, which is a great level to be working with kids because they have some content knowledge. And then you can pull in, and this is how it relates to the eclipse. And so, you can make it sort of it's part of the curriculum. And although the eclipse may not be part of that piece, you can relate it and talk about that they do stars. So you can definitely pull it in. There are definitely creative ways to do it. For the national curriculum, 7th grade, they do light and color. And so you can definitely go in and talk about light and color and spectra, and think about that in terms of what the main body of the sun looks like compared to the corona. So you're taking something that's part of their curriculum that they have to do anyway, and just extending it a tiny bit to pull them into the eclipse. But that then, I think the advantage of that is that the teachers don't feel like they have to carve out time when they really don't have that much time to teach the stuff they have to teach anyway.
Hey folks, so I've got a question because I work at the University of Central Arkansas. We're in the Path of Totality coming up in 2024. I would love to do a big, huge stadium style event. In the initial process of planning this, how do you talk to the administration about a huge event that might also be nothing?
We both had those conversations with administration, I think, didn't we, Angela?
Yes. And we actually, I think, so I think that there's going to be differences like, I'm sure you already saw Bob talk about what he did at Carbondale. At Mizzou, there were certain challenges that meant I went in with the intention of trying to do a stadium event. And it turned out that that was actually a really bad idea for a number of different reasons. But it took having meetings with, the chief of police for MU and the provost and a whole bunch of different people to kind of pull together all of the pieces that I needed to understand as to why it wouldn't work. But that meant that all of those people were aware and we came up with other things to do. So instead of using the stadium, MU has 2 quads and one of the quads is south facing. So that was the perfect position. So we did our event on campus on a quad rather than in a stadium. And so again, this is where the one size fits all doesn't always work. And I don't know what it's like on your campus, but for Mizzou, the big issue is that when there's a football game, the students have to move their cars because there isn't parking associated with the stadium. And so that's suddenly a huge issue for using that on the day there's the first day of classes, which is less of an issue for this April event, but that fed into the whole story. But I don't regret that we didn't use actually the stadium was then used for a smaller event for like rich alumni. But that didn't have the same issues that having it as a big event would be. Whereas Bob obviously did a very successful event in the stadium.
Yeah, the size of our stadium actually was ideal for it. So if you have a really large stadium, no, okay. So if it's small enough, your walls are low enough to actually be able to see more than just the eclipse, because people, it'd be great for them to see all the planets. I think all the major planets are visible during this next one. But if your walls are too high, you end up not being able to use a large amount of your stadium because of the way the shadows fall. So if you want to use it, I would say in the next week or so, go and look at where the shadow lines are in that stadium. A big argument for us in Carbondale was the safety of the situation. Our police really liked the idea of all those school kids getting inside of a location that had a gate around it so that we didn't have kids just running everywhere and people getting lost the day of. And of course, the other thing they already hit on was the infrastructure. We had some questions that flew by earlier. I think Jessica asked collaboration with other nearby colleges / universities. We did a lot of that, and my opinion, I think, was different than a lot of people at my university. Every time I talked to another school, my approach was, we need all the help that we can get to pull this off. So if I can get another school who's even a competitor of ours for students to come in and do something, that helps us immensely. A lot of people thought our administration was worried they'd be stealing our students. And my approach was, if that happens, it's going to happen anyway, because, that's just the way it is. But we had all good experiences with that, actually. And to me, what I did and what I'm doing again for 2024 is, if you want to help out for outreach, great, come. We'll give you your own area if you want it. Actually, we dedicated areas to some different groups that came. We had Louisiana State University on the roof of Saluki Stadium with their balloon tracking equipment and launched balloons from the stadium, which was really exciting. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for partnership. What else?
There's a question about being just outside the path of totality. I don't know that I have.
So
I guess I'm sort of just outside the path of totality for 2024. Thinking about that. So So I will say, like I said, since we were outside of the path and a lot of us wanted to travel, we had an open house within our Department of Physics and Astronomy in the week before. And that way we could do a lot of inside stuff, talk about research that's relevant to the sun, talk about the sun, how to view it, go out and look at the solar telescopes. And just, it was more of a what's going on at the university event. And you could do that sort of thing and then prepare people to be somewhere else again, like during the actual day. So you could still do that outreach and then say, hey, it'd be awesome if you got to go to the Path of Totality.
I would also say that, you know, at this point, it's worth thinking about how you get the best balance of, if it's really only a few miles, you know, how do you convince people to just go and see it? How do you convince, you know, it's those sorts of places where I'm like, yeah, school should close so that the kids can go. You know, that's the sort of perspective that I would have on it, is how do you get the right mix of exactly what Amy was just saying about preparing people who can't actually go very far and will just see the partial, versus those that can make that short trip to really see it. I mean, we're dealing with a similar thing in San Antonio. So downtown San Antonio will not see the 24 eclipse. Where UTSA is, will. But it means where all our lovely museums are, the museums don't want to close. They want to do their own thing, but they're not going to be in totality. And neither is the zoo, which upsets me immensely. I would love to have the zoo in totality. And so, you know, trying to get the right balance of how do you convince people wherever possible, get to totality without, you know, but then helping other people to be prepared to stay where they are.
That kind of ties into one of the other questions about campuses in the path. Are events only for students and community, or is it for visitors who travel? I can say we did ours for both. And we had so much space, basically, we still could have handled an extra 20,000 people. So we were happy to bring in all the visitors possible. I think you'll find what's interesting is people who are visiting from a long way off seem to want to have a ticket to park somewhere or to get into a venue or something. So even though most campuses, most public university campuses are open and free, people can literally come in and park about anywhere they want, some, you know, with some rules being put on that. But we decided early on, if we didn't define some venues, we could have other groups coming in and setting up their own venue on campus. And there, you know, might not be a whole lot we could do about it. So we tried to be as open as possible as we could with it. I saw Stuart asked about projection methods, and the link that I posted was for a sun funnel. And you're asking if anyone tried that in lieu of direct viewing. Actually, we had sun funnels all over campus on Eclipse Day. And that, of course, that works for the partial phases of the eclipse, and it works exceptionally well. It's a pretty high resolution image that you get, and it's indirect. So you're looking at, it's basically a rear screen projection of the partial eclipse.
And I definitely recommend, you know, having that available or teaching people how to use those, because if you don't have the eclipse glasses, or if you don't have enough and you're sharing them around, you can still experience the eclipse instead of just looking directly at it. So, and, you know, a lot of our educators, especially with the things that got canceled, we think that would be a way to try to get around that, is to teach them, you know, to do the projection method. Some, the people that did have an event said that was the funnest part was saying what makes the coolest projection. So they got like a colander and they would try their fingers and they would try lots of different things to see what really was the coolest thing. So that was a neat experiment in itself. And because at first, a lot of the educators were mad that we weren't sending enough glasses for everyone to have their own glasses. And so we needed to really educate them and say, you know, that's not the only way to observe this. So, you know, I agree that doing indirect stuff is a big deal. Another thing to think about for campuses is we had the NASA simulcast of the eclipse put, a lot of campuses now have TV screens throughout all their buildings. And so we got them to put the NASA simulcast of the eclipse on the TV screens during that day. So even if kids were, students were going to class and couldn't come outside, or earlier in the day when it was still on the opposite coast, they would see it and say, oh yeah, today's the eclipse, and then remember to come out and check out the viewing. And I was just, thinking about the way Bob had the Jumbotron in the stadium. That could be another thing, especially if it's questionable weather. You could have the simulcast up. So even if you don't get to see what you're wanting to see, you can watch it on a simulcast. So
we did exactly that with it, actually, but that was our big rain backup plan if we had a lot of problems. I saw Jen Carter posted a question in the chat. Are you folks familiar with any higher education examples from 2017 of successful implementation of integrated learning within the school, but across all departments?
So this was something that I really tried to push was, I could see ways of doing this across the curriculum, across every department. And I tried, but just didn't get buy-in at all. Now, the difference is now I'm a department chair, and I brought this up to the department chair council, and I got some buy-in already. So, and this is like people like art and music and so on. So I'm a little more hopeful that we will get that done this time around. But, it was just, again, I think it falls into the same sort of space as some of the problem with K through 12, that a lot of courses have so much material that people have to cover anyway, that they don't want to deviate from it. And if you're an R1 institution and your research is so much more important than your teaching, allegedly, a lot of the faculty just didn't want to put in the effort to figure out how to do that. And so it just didn't fly. UTSA is also an R1 institution now, so I'm hopeful that we can prove them wrong.
So hi everyone. So I wanted to ask about like a question that's a little bit more like health safety wise a question, because of like the pandemic going on right now, and who knows what will happen in the future. So I mean, is it okay to like share Eclipse viewers, or do they have to be sanitized before other people use them? And what about like viewing through a telescope, with the eyepiece, does that have to be like sanitized? And, so any suggestions and recommendations would be much appreciated.
So I was actually going to, thanks, Noella. I was going to bring up this issue, especially with the glasses. We were selling the idea that, yeah, one set of glasses between 3 or 4 is enough, because you don't need to watch the partial phase continuously. You just don't. It's like watching a football game. You don't watch the pitch the whole time. But I can totally understand that people might not want to share the glasses. And so trying to figure out, and I don't have a good answer for the question that's being asked, but I think it's something we need to be thinking about. I know I'm already doing events where, the indoor events where I do spectroscopy demos, and I use they're the same sort of glasses, but they're the diffraction gratings instead of eclipse film or solar view film. And, I'm like, do I have enough of these to give them away to all these kids? Will they be unhappy? And so far they've been very happy to share them. So I would say we're at a point where people are less worried about that. Whether that's a good thing is a whole other question.
All right, thank you.
I would add to that, as far as the telescopes go. We've been doing camera assisted viewing for some time during COVID. It's also during the eclipse. So with our astronomy classes right now, we have a camera running, and that's streamed over to a computer, and sometimes we run a projector with it. With the eclipse, it'd be a really good idea to run it to a projector, or I have even seen where you can set a website and people can connect to it on their phones and see it directly. That would be quite a bit safer. We have one question that I think has come, it was all over the chat earlier during the plenary sections that I wanted to speak to. Someone asked about, during the 2017 eclipse, he understood that schools forbade students from looking at totality due to insurance issues. Is this still an issue? Does someone, Angela or
I can answer.
Amy?
So I would say, and we're talking about K through 12 here. I don't think that's so much of an issue for colleges because ostensibly they're all grown-ups. And I mean ostensibly. Mother of an 18-year-old. But with the K through 12, I would say that, yes, there's still going to be some of that. And part of our job is to show that it's not a problem. And I think we have enough examples where schools did a great job that we have that evidence. We know that there was basically no problems at, Columbia Public Schools. My kids at the time were in, it was the beginning of 5th and 8th grade for my kids. And they both got to see it in school. Every school was ready. All the kids had glasses. And it was done really well. And I think that, that's the sort of example that we need to be showing that, yeah, you don't really need to worry about this. But there will still, we have to be proactive. We have to really push on it.
Tom, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I was just doing some research on stellarium in order to determine what planets were going to be visible right around the moon and the sun at the time of totality, which is going to be a great image to show people prior to seeing totality so that they know that they can see Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, etc. Fantastic news there. I'm going to be viewing from Niagara Falls, Canada, and literally those planets are in a perfect row within a few degrees of the sun and the moon. Just going to be a beautiful view of the ecliptic and the planets, which is fantastic. As I was doing that, though, all of a sudden the International Space Station flies by, and as it turns out, from that location, the International Space Station is flying literally right past the moon 9 minutes before the partial eclipse starts. So this situation is probably going to be similar to it, no matter where you are. So that kind of blew me away, because that might add one more thing of thinking about as we're witnessing this whole thing. But it also raises issues that I haven't figured out yet whether it is actually doing a transit of the moon at that time. From stellarium, I can't really tell, but I'll have to figure that out, whether it's an actual transit. But even if it's not, I doubt we'll be able to see anything, because the little light flashing on the ISS during the daytime is probably not going to be visible. But anyway, I wanted to throw that whole thing out there and get anyone's thoughts on it, or maybe everyone could figure out where that's going to be occurring from their locations.
So there's a comment that just popped up in the chat about not being in favor of eclipse photography. And I would second this, in the sense that unless you can have things set up so that they are basically running pretty much automatically, it's something that nearly every eclipse chaser that I know would say, if this is your first eclipse, don't even try to take photos. Don't even consider it. Just enjoy. Just be absorbed in the event. Don't try and do that, because you'll miss stuff. And I think that is really great advice. And so, and especially, I think it's nice if the students can be involved, but like with Project Clear, the Kate, the Citizen Kate project, it was, there were opportunities to have students engaged. I had we were one of the locations, I had 2 high school students supervised by a graduate student running our location, which was fantastic. but it was set up in a way that it wasn't like they had to pay really, really close attention, so they could enjoy the event at the same time as collecting data. So I think, really, if you're going to have them do observing or have them taking photos, find ways to do it like that.
Yeah, Kate was just a push button operation
Exactly.
once it started, and then you could stand back and enjoy it. And if you have a team, like Angela just said, you can trade off who's doing what during it so that nobody has to sit and stare at a computer screen the whole time.
So there's a question about how far in advance to buy Eclipse classes. So this is something that at the college level, I would say, if you're the person doing the organizing, I would go into the bookstore. I basically coordinated with the bookstore, and because we were an SEC school at Mizzou, it was, getting permission to use the official logo is a big deal. And so I worked through the bookstore, and we had not just glasses, but other merch as well. But the glasses were then approved, but we had them more than 2 years out. We started buying them, and we bought a whole bunch of them. And then they were sold in several locations, but including through the bookstore. And so that really worked. I've already got glasses that are UTSA branded. Not that I have permission to use the logo or anything. Shh, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, it's good to remember too. You use the glasses for looking at the sun, and you can do that at any time and get a lot of practice in ahead of time. How did you fund the glasses you used outside at university? Well, my university paid for a lot because I told them the glasses were cheaper than the regular marketing materials, and students did not throw the glasses away like the regular marketing materials. So that was our biggest push. There's a lot of other ways. I know Michelle Nichols is on here, I think still, and y'all had a coupon on the side of your glasses that was a tear off. And if I remember right, you might have had a bank that funded the glasses.
Can't do to you.
Sorry.
There we go.
I had it turned off. So yeah, we had a few sponsors, and so for a certain price level, they got their name on the glasses. But we had 2 tear-off coupons on the glasses, on the earpieces. One of them was for a certain number of dollars off to get into the Adler, and it was good through a certain date. And then the second one was a certain percentage off or something on a membership to the Adler. The only problem that we had was that people were using the glasses without tearing off the coupons. And so they were trying to fit them over their ears, and these little coupons were sticking downward from the earpiece parts. And so, yeah, that was an unexpected little problem, but it was okay. I think next time we would get the solar viewers, the rectangular version, and you can just put the coupons on the side or on the bottom or something, and then they don't get in the way.
And
we applied for community outreach grants that our university had. We also worked with a space grant, got some funds from them. Again, that was an application process. So we sort of went through several different things and added everything together. Of course, ours were a lot where you gave away to the educators throughout the state. So it was definitely a community outreach related expense. And then we had some left from that. And we did some other fundraising as well. We had a crowdfunding campaign, and we asked our physics department to donate some funds. And so we kind of collected a lot of funds that way. We also, there's a NASA facility, and they had some, so we got some NASA's glasses donated to us as well.
So we actually sold them. So I actually got fronted money by my department to buy a whole bunch of them, and those were the ones that were being sold through the bookstore. So the bookstore got the legal stuff done for us to have the branding, but then I was selling them on the road across Missouri. I was selling them in our observatory on campus. They were being sold in the bookstore, and we actually made quite a lot of profit on merch generally, but certainly on the glasses. So that's, if you can find a way to get someone to front you the money, that's another model for how to do this.
And I threw a link in the chat. By the way, there was a question quite a while ago in the chat about where can I get more information about eclipses. The AAS website is really good for that. If you go to that link, there's a lot of drop-down menus. And I know NASA is developing a site as well, but I do not have the address for that. If anyone's on from NASA knows the link to that site, just drop it into the chat, please. So
Is it just Bob that froze?
Looks like just Bob.
There is a question about ANSI or ASTM standards for the glasses. I can't answer that. Can you?
So I think that that's something that, you know, there is an international standard and that's what we want them to meet. And as long as they meet that standard, we're good. But there's actually a lot of information on the AAS Eclipse website if you want to get into that. The person to really ask about that is Rick. I don't know if he's still in this session.
It looks like he posted in the chat.
He did.
Yeah, I've been throwing things in the chat. Basically, you know, the reason for the ISO standard is that there were national standards, but they were all different. So the idea was take your, you know, take the best of all the standards, put them together and let that be the international standard. And so every country that signs on to the ISO basically is saying that standard is the one to use. But a lot of people, just because they like to be thorough and they like to reassure people, is they'll throw every standard that they can think of on their glasses, you know, ANSI and all the other ones. I mean, ASTM, for example, is part of the ISO panel. So that's the standard that matters.
Looks like Lindsay Fuller has a question.
Yes, hi. So I live here, I'm at UTSA also. And so my question is there some kind of, is there a forum or a place that for us who know of places that people can go, is there a way for us to get that information to the community of people who need a place to go? So for example, I have a friend with a 300-acre ranch and she's like, yeah, I'll host some people on my land. And so like, how do I connect you guys or, you know, your friends with someone like her?
I might think about, are there groups you want to work with? Like, do you want to have scout groups that can come camp on the land and then reach out to them? Or are you looking for scientists to come and then, you know, then you can work through these professional societies like AAS and some of the other, or NSTA. So I would think about who you might want to, rather than just putting it out to the general public, especially to come onto private land, you might end up having issues.
Right.
You might want to think about specific groups that you would like to support.
Mm-hmm.
And someone suggests in the chat to check whether you need any permits for that kind of thing.
This is Texas. We can do what we want.
Well, and honestly, here in Texas, there really isn't a whole lot of public land, which is why, you know, I'm like, I know people with fields, you know, so for, you know, somebody that just wants to come to Texas, like I know of places that they can go. I just don't know how to get that information to, you know, an individual. You know, perhaps I could get that information to a group, but I don't know how to get it to an individual.
So there's another comment from Laurie as well about porta potties, and I'm just going to mention a story about this. So remember that the 2017 eclipse was basically the first day of classes for most universities in that part of the country, and Mizzou would have pretty much all the porta potties from the greater St. Louis area booked for the whole of our football season. And so places like SIU and Carbondale would have a hard time getting all the porta potties they needed because it's the same market, because it's all the greater St. Louis area. And so, you know, if you need to have porta potties for whatever you're doing, and that may include on campus, you need to start thinking about it before they all get booked up. Like I say, in that case, it was something that was booked by Mizzou for a completely different purpose, but it meant that there was less than people might have thought. No more questions?
There's a hand up.
Rob.
Rob.
So since that seems to, I didn't want to derail the conversation. It was so good, but since we seemed a little lull, I will potentially make us take a little left turn here. So one thing we did in 2019 in the solar eclipse in Chile is we got together with some students from the University of La Serena and actually attempted to redo the Eddington experiment on Cerro Tololo. I was wondering if there's any people that had thoughts on that, because we would love to share our experience and get some teams of students at various universities and colleges around the country and see if they would like to do that, because we have a fairly good idea of what type scopes and focal lengths and camera setups would be suitable for that, and it's probably not quite as extravagant setup as you would imagine. So I was curious if anyone had any thoughts on that.
So I know of at least one person who was planning to do that. I think up at, they're based out of Portland, and I know of another person that was doing it in 2017. So I have no doubt that people will want to do it, but that means that we just need Rob as a resource, right?
Yes, and we are looking at possibly doing, proposing some workshops at AAPT, AAS type meetings in the next year or two here to do that sort of thing too. But I just thought I'd at least bring it up here and get the ball rolling and see if there's any other interest, and people can contact me or IM me, DM me or whatever, and we can chat.
I think it's the sort of thing that for campuses that have either astronomy clubs, student astronomy clubs, or SPS, Student Physics Society, Society of Physics Students, those are the sort of groups where then it might be really fun for them to do it. So I could totally see people being able to have fun with this.
Rob, I just want to jump in. For the 2017 eclipse, NASA on their eclipse page wrote up an extensive activity for how to actually do the Eddington experiment and what that would entail. And I understand that there were at least a couple of amateurs during the 2017 eclipse that actually attempted it and succeeded.
Not only that, it was published in Sky and Telescope.
That's right, to within some reasonable standard, error bars. So, it's totally doable, and there's a lot of literature out there about how to do it successfully. So we can leverage on that experience to really, really nail it this time if we want to.
Yes, Don Bruns is the one I read about in 2017. He had a very nice, extensive paper he wrote and published about it.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking of. Thank you for the name.
So there's a few people posting in the chat about different meetings that are coming up. So the AAS has the summer meeting in Pasadena in June, and we will have a splinter session at that meeting. So if you're attending the AAS, then come and find us. And then Michelle posted about the fall AGU in Chicago in December. Sorry.
That's what I said.
And we have done stuff at AGU in the past as well, so that might be a cool thing to do. So, I never get to go to AGU because I'm married to a geologist.
There's another hand up, but it looks like it's gone back down.
Okay, well, I finally made it back in. I seem to have lost network connectivity there, and everything went down for a moment. So I don't have I just have the recent chat since I got back on.
Glad to have you back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. So we've got, I believe, about 20 minutes left if I've got the time right. What other questions do we have or comments? Okay, looks like some discussion about the Eddington experiment going on the side. I think we had someone trying to do that on campus with a telescope replica that Eddington used, if I remember right. But you have to actually take observations before and during, correct? The eclipse, before the eclipse and during the eclipse, and Sten said yes.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to do. It really is tricky, and it requires somebody that's pretty expert with using, their Nikons to photograph star fields before and after, but it's doable. I mean, the quality of the technology today is better than it was in 1920, and that's at the amateur level. And certainly Rick can verify that.
Yeah.
And as you're planning these events, try to get your school mascot to come. So I will say West Virginia school mascot is not a big costume. It's actually it's a mountaineer, and it's a person in a buckskin outfit. It's not, so they actually can see, whereas most of the other mascots probably won't be able to see anything. But we had, professional photography from the university at the event. And that was one of our best photos that came out, was the mountaineer and another person that happened to have the West Virginia logo on their shirt. And they were both looking up with their solar eclipse glasses, and we put that on everything. And so if you're trying to, convince somebody in your administration to support this, then just say, the marketing is amazing that can come out of this sort of thing. And I think we might have actually included that picture in the paper that I put the link in the chat. So if you need to show that as advertisement, say, look at what West Virginia University got out of theirs. Cool thing with their mascot thing.
Now all we have to do is encourage a sitting president not to stare at the eclipse.
So.
Yeah, and I on the national news that in 2017, I remember sitting and waiting for CBS to switch off of the president looking up at the eclipse to get back to eclipse coverage, actually. The real eclipse coverage, I should say.
Rick, I think, Rick, the estimate is that set us back about 50 years in safety.
And again, if you're trying to convince people, like people have sort of mentioned it in passing, but get your university logo on those glasses, and just be like, we're using this for recruiting. Administrators love it.
Rick just came back on. He asked what the issue was. And Rick, we were talking about our last president staring at, I think it was a partial eclipse actually, right after totality is what he was staring at. And
well, he was at the White House, so it was partial the whole time for him.
Oh, true. Yeah. So we did the same thing, Amy, with our mascot. We had our craft shop make this giant pair of eclipse glasses, a replica, and took pictures. And that was, like you said, it was just so popular, especially with students. So other ways to
Rick, just in defense, Rick, I tried to be diplomatic by just saying a sitting president. So, anyway.
We all know who you meant.
So other ways to engage students, I talked about lead up events like the lunar eclipses. And I think, Angela, you said something about this. They're okay. It's kind of a take it or leave it sometimes, depending on how cold it is outside, right? But they're cool. And it's something that people are interested in. I think eclipses in general are more interesting than most astronomy events to people, and the media latches onto them also. That's, I hit on while I was talking how much media we had. That was a big reason for where we placed our events on campus and what we're looking at in 2024 as well, because the athletics facilities were the only place that we had the capability to handle the amount of media that showed up. There were 80 media organizations, and we gave out all the press passes we had on Eclipse Day, which was 300. And I heard a number just over that, 320 something was the amount of press that we had on campus. So the infrastructure, the fiber optic connections, the satellite uplinks, which I understand aren't so much of a problem coming up in 2024. There's been a shift over to IP uplinks for most major broadcasters, but it's still an issue. You can't just set out in a field with a cell connection and handle much of anything, really.
I will also say the Eclipse sells itself. The ramp up is huge right before it. So that's why we did ours like sort of the weekend, I think, before. Because all of a sudden people were like, oh, I hear there's an eclipse happening. Can you tell me more about it? And then that's the chance to get that engaged audience on your campus and teach them about science.
Trying to talk to people about the eclipse a few years in advance. So if anyone else had the experience I did, I got a lot of eyes just glazing over when I talk about it. But then they'd hear about it from somebody else, and they'd hear about it from somebody else, and eventually they'd get it, or they'd watch a movie of one that happened earlier, and they'd finally get it. So there's actually quite a few documentaries out there now that you can refer people to. And Rick, I just saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, on this point, the media have made it pretty clear that, given all the stuff that they're dealing with all the time and have been for years now, it just seems to keep getting worse with pandemics and wars and everything else. It's really challenging to get the media interested in the eclipse until right before it. But the fact is that because we've now had an eclipse recently and everybody remembers it, there are others, people who you might, like your school administrators or stuff like that, who at least will, I don't think their eyes will glaze over anymore. They know what happened in 2017. They know it was a big deal. But it's still gonna be hard to get the media to give it a lot of attention in advance. One thing that NPR told us that, if you can get local media interested in a story about your preparations this far in advance, that's an excuse that they might jump on to do a story now. But to talk about the eclipse and what you'll see and all that kind of thing, and got to get ready for it, that's tougher this far out.
There's a question about success metrics. So with ours, we asked all the educators that were involved to report on the events that they had, including sort of how many people came, what population came to any of their events. So we got that information. And then, sort of had a estimate of how many people were at our on-campus thing, especially with pictures. That was helpful. An idea that I had, but didn't get it implemented fast enough, but I hope to do in the future, was I wanted to create a unique hashtag and put it on the Eclipse glasses. And so since it was a statewide effort, I wanted it to be sort of like, West Virginia, the WV Eclipse 2017 or something like that. And I had hoped to then, if people encourage people to take pictures during their events or, put it on social media, and then you could follow that and get a number of how many people were engaged with using your hashtag. I didn't get that done in time for our printing of our glasses. If you're doing custom glasses, you got to get them kind of early. And so that didn't come to fruition. But that's a suggestion that people are welcome to run with, that you could use for some sort of measuring of engagement afterwards.
That's a good, Sten just said one metric might be how many people viewed the 2017 eclipse and are returning. That's one of the things we put on our website here at SIU was a form for people to fill out, listing their email address and checking off what they're interested for information, as well as I wanted to ask, where are you from and did you see the 2017 eclipse? Just to get an idea of the audience. Jay, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just going to point out I volunteer at the Air and Space Museum in DC, and you know, certainly, well, the last eclipse I went to Casper, Wyoming. This one I'll probably stay in DC for both of those, but we always take part in all of them. And if it's cloudy, we'll put a TV set on and watch it on TV.
Yep.
So I think coming back to it, not so much metrics, but just figuring out what sort of impact things had. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Skype a Scientist. If you are a science professor and you don't know about Skype a Scientist, you need to learn. So it's basically an opportunity to interact with a classroom via, and it's usually Zoom, not Skype, or occasionally Google Hangouts. But basically you interact with the classroom, and it's aimed at actually interacting with classrooms where they don't have scientists close by. So it's been in existence since pre-pandemic. But I've done a lot in the last few years, and there was a class that I interacted with last semester that was in northern Kansas City. So they were in the path of totality, and they were, you know, they were old enough that they basically my youngest kid's age. So they had been, you know, able to enjoy and participate in the eclipse in 2017. And it was clearly a huge impact. And they had loads of questions and were so, it was the most engaged I've had through Skype a Scientist. And I do it a lot. And I think that speaks volumes about what impact the eclipse had, whether that's, you know, how you put that in terms of a university's impact or anything like that. That's a little tricky.
So I see in the chat, there's been a few questions about where to get glasses from. And for people who can't see the chat, Rainbow Symphony and American Paper Optics are the two largest manufacturers, I believe. I've used both actually, but our largest orders were through Rainbow Symphony. And I will say, if you do a volume order, you get much, much better prices. Even team up with somebody. You know, if you're just interested in getting glasses and you're not so interested in what's on the glasses, you can team up and put together a bulk order. Get the orders in soon. I don't know where they're at with manufacturing now, but as we got about 6 months out from the 2017 eclipse, I remember Mark at Rainbow Symphony started telling us, hey, if you're going to get any more, I really need to know it now because it just gets busy at the end. So we've got about 10 more minutes left. If you've been holding out to the end to ask a question, now's your time.
Eileen. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, here we are. Yeah, I'm Eileen O'Donoghue. I'm at St. Lawrence University. We're in the path of totality in 2024. And so we haven't done this before. And I was wondering, we're starting to talk about ordering eclipse glasses in collaboration with some other institutions. And we have no idea what number to start at. You know, and what are the prices when you're getting custom ones? And yeah, I have to work with my bookstore. So I just, you know, 1,000, 10,000, what are you talking about?
I would say 5,000 to 10,000
to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on how many are you giving these away?
We're just starting to talk about it. I mean, our bookstore will get some to sell, but we're also going to need a lot to give away, I think.
Okay.
What
And-
community are you trying to give away to? Local town? Lottery?
People that come to the university, which will be, probably a lot of locals. I'm also involved with the Adirondack Sky Center and Observatory in Tupper Lake, which is even closer to the center of totality than we are. And they will probably, we'll have them to sell before the event, but at the event, we just want to give them away. So, so thousands is reasonable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For our statewide outreach, we distributed tens of thousands. So
tens of thousands. Okay. Yeah, we're not doing
that was a statewide effort. So
yeah, I think we did 75,000 at SIU. And then Michelle brought 30,000 and we had a bunch of NASA glasses there as well. We had a little bit left over, but most people that I heard from did not have glasses left over after their events. They do, even though you hand them out and you tell people to be careful with them, especially if you have kids coming to your event, the first thing you do is stick them in their pockets and tear them up. So
yes,
as Rick's saying, unless they're scratched, punctured, or otherwise damaged, you still should be able to use them, but they tend to get tore up when they get in the hands of kids. And the actual viewers, the cards, as Michelle mentioned, they're a rectangular card with a strip of the film in the center of it. You can put it on a lanyard. That's really good for kids because they don't lose them, and then you can share them from one person to the next.
Yeah. And they're what kind of prices do these go for when you're buying in that much bulk?
So there's a lot
customized, if we put a custom logo and stuff.
So Michelle put in the chat, they're buying on the order of 250,000 at 21 cents a piece. I think ours on the order of our initial order of 50,000 was about 30 to 35 cents a piece. And Rick was mentioning about 50 cents a piece, which is probably more in line with the small orders, like 5,000 glasses.
If you're buying 5,000, it's going to be more like 50 cents.
Like 50 cents a piece. Okay.
Yeah. And it depends on how many colors and things like that you have on your branding.
Right.
And stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Pamela, you mentioned in Indonesia, and I think you're right. Some of the glasses were pretty impressive. Some of them look like masks. I saw some alternative stuff in Indonesia as well, actual cards that had glass plates in them that were good, but honestly not a whole lot better than the glasses that you see. So don't be fooled. The cheap glasses, the cheap cards are good, and you can spend a lot more money on ones that have actual glass in them and different filters, but it's not that big of an improvement. One thing that we did have that I thought was a cool improvement was Celestron actually donated a bunch of 2-power viewers to us, and we handed those out to people coming into the stadium. And so those are like binoculars. They're these little pop-up cards, and if you see any pics of our stadium, that you can see them being used by people all throughout. And we also, again, we handed them out ahead of time so people got used to using them and knew how to use them, so we didn't have to do all that education on Eclipse Day itself.
I don't have any way of raising my hand, so I appear to be really rude by just sort of jumping into this conversation. So I apologize for this seeming rudeness. I'm curious how eclipses are actually used in a college level curriculum. Now, I have one idea that I think might be one that goes just beyond the basic orbital geometry, and that is calculating at how long into the future we will continue to have total solar eclipses. And I come up with an estimate of about 1.6 billion years before we have our last total eclipse. And that includes the expansion of the sun during its evolution, plus the orbital changes in the Earth and the Moon. And this is all basically back of the envelope. But I'm sure, an introductory astronomy 1 course, the kids, are familiar with algebra and would probably be able to figure something like that out as an extra credit assignment or whatever you want to do. What do you think about that?
I would not give that to an introductory physics, to an introductory astronomy course. They would freak out and go, I don't need to do math. But I like the idea. Maybe you went to a nicer college.
But Dan McGowan's got a lot of interesting animations and exercises posted on eclipse2024.org, but even the ones that seem to be for lower grades are pretty advanced, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by having it in the curriculum, because, you know, you can certainly teach about it and ask them questions about it. I mean, it's standard in an intro astronomy course that they will learn about eclipses. Giving them exercises to do, giving them homeworks like you're talking, that sort of question, that's a different issue. But I think it really depends on the college, on the level that you're working on. I would actually say that question is higher level than you're thinking. But that doesn't mean we can't use it.
So if I've been tracking the time correct, I think we're coming up on the end of this session in about a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going to go ahead and share a slide here. Pamela, do you have to hand that over to me to share something?
Oh, because you came back in.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think I've got the right one here. So this should be showing you what's coming up next. So if I'm reviewing the schedule right, we've got a break coming up next at 4:45 Eastern time. And then coming back in at 5 Eastern time, we've got 5 Eastern time, we have a poster session, which is on Gather. If you haven't used Gather before, I would encourage you to get on there and play around with it a little bit. There's an avatar you can customize and get into the poster session space to walk around and figure out how it works. It's a really cool tool. And then after that, let's see, we have our poster session going on until the public lecture that Angela is giving at 7 p.m., which is being streamed publicly to YouTube, correct, Angela?
That's right. So share with your friends. They don't have to be registered for the meeting.
Okay, so with that, we will go ahead and end this session. Thank you everyone for attending, and feel free to drop us emails if you have any other questions.